This is the Mod Pod, brought to you by Modality, helping businesses optimize their Microsoft technologies everywhere.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Mod Pod. This week we have topics that include: does Teams make you productive? Have we reached our peak in communication? And how much data is too much data? And today, to talk about these topics, we have Simon Gardner, who is senior consultant within our collaboration intelligence team, and John Ketley, who is service improvement program manager within managed services. Let's get going.
So my topic for this week is, does Teams make you more productive? I think we all know there are definite benefits to this technology, but I think, as we'll get into, there are some negatives to it as well, potentially, if you don't approach it in a kind of intentional way and how you're going to use it. If you just dive headfirst in, it can get you into some situations you potentially don't want to be in. So what do we think about that?
I guess my initial question back is, when we're talking about productivity, what do we actually mean by productivity? It's quite an open one, isn't it? It's there, as you said, there are obvious benefits. So not bouncing emails around with various attachments is the one I think that everybody defaults back to, because it's quite a simple one to be able to justify. But I guess where do you draw that line? Where do you sort of take that productivity question up to? I guess actually, Simon, you're probably best placed more than most to know about some of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a fair bit of time with our teamwork analytics software, helping customers understand how their people are using Teams. It's been less of an issue with Modality. We've been mostly a remote first company for many years, but there's an awful lot of organizations where, when the pandemic hit, suddenly people weren't in offices. They were all spread out around the country working from home. A lot of big onboarding of teams, maybe accelerating projects that were already happening, and people getting used to this whole thing of how you do remote work. A lot of, I know from friends in other organizations, lots of regular meetings, regular chats that they would have in offices directly turned into Teams meetings that then got fixed in the calendar every week. They very quickly ended up with a calendar full of meetings and no time to actually do any work.
I think that's an important thing, actually, because one of the big trends, I think, when lockdown kicked in, was that probably the vast majority of people we work with, or I work with, and I don't think I was isolated in it, ended up in a situation where your diary just became complete fair game. If there was a gap in it, they could take it because they knew you were at home. It's like you weren't going anywhere. And so I think you're right. There's certainly a question around the culture that we've got with lots and lots of meetings. Is that really working? One thing I've done recently, which isn't necessarily so much around productivity in possibly the sense that we're talking about it at the moment, but I've gone through and I've taken the approach of, I always color code my calendar. I'm that sad. I'm
used to that, actually. One of my colleagues introduced me to that, and it's really good.
It's quite interesting. But what I've done is I've stopped color coding things like internal meetings, external meetings, customer meetings, all that stuff. I've actually now started to color code it as, is this working towards the future, or is this sorting something that's operational? And you get a very visual representation of. I color coded it and looked at it and go, well, I'm not doing anything to progress stuff here. I'm just dealing with normal day to day. And so actually, I think there is a real danger, and you probably hit the nail on the head at the beginning, John, about people just turning meetings into into sort of virtual things, etc. And I would say by default, no, there's probably people aren't productive. Can they be? Is an absolutely yes. But where's your head on it?
So I think, going back to your point, of what is productivity, I think if you boil it down to getting stuff done, and to do that, assuming that people need a block of time to do that, I think it can be a real challenge. And if you do a kind of an analogy with taking the technology and the digital side out of it, and said, if we're going to give somebody a complex problem to solve, what environment would you put them in? I think there are quite a few things you wouldn't do, which if you stuck a Teams UI in front of them, you would expose them to. And to kind of stretch that analogy to breaking point a little bit, you wouldn't allow people to slide up to that person while they were trying to work on something and start chatting to them, like chat gives you the option to do. You wouldn't put lots of nice, enticing things in bold type in their eye line whilst they're trying to concentrate on this thing. And you wouldn't let them wander off at the end of their working day and have those people follow them around, still bombarding them with messages and questions, which is kind of like what happens if you have the app and take it home and spend your evenings on it. So there's definitely those huge benefits to it, which you guys have mentioned, the working collaboratively on documents and getting those fast decisions when they're needed. But how does that actually balance out with those negative sides when people have to get their heads down and do a piece of deep knowledge work? It's a bit of a war to try and get that time, and you have to really go into using stuff like focus time, which I'm starting to see where it's putting in those 2 hours, setting you to focusing so people can't punch through. I think you have to approach it really intentionally. If you just rock up, open your Teams client and start clicking on bold, I don't think you might find a role where that is, where you are purely operational and you're just there to react to stuff, and then all power to you, and that's going to help you really well. If you're somebody who's got to produce something a bit more proactively, who has a document to write or something to deliver that needs that block of time to approach, I think unless you're careful, it can really be challenging.
That's one thing that we instilled quite heavily in the pre-sales team, because obviously they have documents to turf out, and not by any means the only people, but they would get new requests coming in from the salespeople going, yeah, we need this, we need this, we need this. All of a sudden things are building up over here. They're not actually cracking on because, what is it they say? Every interruption you get, it takes 23 minutes or something to focus yourself back onto what you were doing. So we had quite a strong message of, if you've got a document to get out the door, you go dark. You just come off of everything, shut your Outlook, shut your Teams client, you write the document. And it does feel like there's an element of not bowing to the machines, as it were, because how many people do you interact with on a daily basis? I would say probably 12 to 15, maybe, for me, and you get 12 to 15 people messaging you. That's quite a lot of interruption, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of these concepts are kind of cutting through from the development world, because obviously if you're a developer, a key part of, if you're sat in front of a bunch of code, you have a whole bunch of things that you're figuring out in your head. That's very deep, concentrated work.
Yeah,
and I think that's where a lot of those studies around losing focus and coming back to it came from. If you're needing to get your head back into what you were doing, that can take a really long time. And they generally, in the development world, they're a little bit better, I think, about protecting time, having those times when people will do that. Then also having the structure of doing things like a quick daily stand-up to just quickly summarize where everyone's at, what blockers they might have, what they maybe need help on, figure out a quick time to do that at some point in the day, and then it's heads down, get on with work for a bit, and have those times in the day to do the collaborative stuff, to do the discussing, to do that, and then split off and do that. Because so much of that is really applicable to this kind of knowledge work, where you do have a document to do, or a slide deck to prepare for a meeting, and you do need that time and space to do it.
I mean, I swear by the focus time. It's a saving grace for me, because I'm not good enough at planning forward enough, 2 weeks ahead and actually putting in time that belongs to me. And most people are pretty good at respecting it. But I think before I started using it regularly, I don't think I'd be, particularly out of line of saying that I would get to the end of a day sometimes and just think, oh, achieve nothing. I've just responded to stuff.
It's react mode all day and without
never
getting.
So I think, I think, obviously the question in hand is does Teams make you productive? I think the answer is yes, it does, but you almost have to manage it back.
Yeah.
So you have to set your boundaries to what works. And if somebody's messaging you and it's in the middle of something, come out of it. Come out. Teams, close it down.
I think a key thing with focus time as well is using the sort of status feature to actually say what you're doing and when you'll be back. So,
yes.
If I've got an hour's focus time saying I'm working on this document, I'm going to be back at 11 o'clock. So when somebody goes to message you, they see that, they'll go, oh, okay, I'll remind myself to pick that up a bit later on, rather than disturb you with it right now.
Cool. And that actually sort of leads into the second topic. But I was going to sort of just say something back there, and it's like, no, I'm going to hold on to that for just a little bit longer. But I do wonder how many organisations just think that they've popped Teams out there and haven't actually clicked onto the fact that people might actually not be as productive as they think they are, because they're in that reactive response sort of mode, rather than actually, I've got a set of tools here. Am I using them in the right way?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to say sit people down in front of it and then your productivity and all your extra work is going to materialize. I think you need these guiding principles around it. Like even with focus time, I agree. I absolutely love using that. It doesn't stop some people booking a meeting straight over the top of it, which you could be expected to enjoy. And then, you're declining a meeting for your focus time. And if there's not kind of a culture of that ingrained in, if the person's not familiar with it, it can look a little bit precious that you're bouncing a meeting which might have 6 people they're trying to coordinate. I think you need to get that kind of message out there that those blocks are sacrosanct to a degree, and go sticking stuff over the top of it. Or if you see somebody who's focusing, come back later, don't expect an instant response, because I think it's problematic if you can't get that message out.
And once you actually start accepting things over your focus time, you're setting another benchmark, aren't you? It's like, it's my focus. Well, it's not that focused, is it really? I don't mind too much. Yeah. And is there? So I tend to put in the focus time on 2 hours a day, and that might be sort of 2 1-hour blocks or 1 2-hour block, whatever Outlook deems most appropriate. Is having a 2-hour focus block too big? Should it be a couple of 1 hours, or is there not a right or a wrong on that?
Probably depends on your role a little bit.
Yeah. I think it depends a lot on how you work. I know a lot of people really swear by the sort of Pomodoro technique.
Yeah, that's what I use.
That aims to you aim to have these sort of shorter focused things, because not just from I'm being distracted by other people, but I'm distracting myself by, I can just go and check the news or check my email or do this, that, and the other. Like, for a lot of people, that's a manageable chunk of time if you break it down to that. And I've seen these sort of Pomodoro timers that can integrate into Skype or Teams and give a little countdown for your colleagues to say, Simon will be available in 15 minutes again. But yeah, generally I try to stick to sort of hour sessions.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So does it make you productive? Yeah. Do you have to be disciplined in it? Yeah.
It's one of the great things through the pandemic has actually been seeing friends get onto Teams and actually see how remote working can work. There's been a lot of organizations that were very reluctant to do it, who are actually seeing the benefits of it now. When it's done well and managed properly, it's fantastic.
Cool. Brilliant. Let's go on to the next part then.
Yeah, so I think there is a case for if you think about the sort of digitizing of the office, we've gone through an age of having a telephone on every desk, to everyone having email on PCs, to the whole instant messaging, Link and Skype for Business and online meetings era, and now we're into Teams and these collaborative working spaces and group chat and all the rest of it. And I think there is it's maybe worth pausing and thinking, are we giving people too many different ways to communicate? Do people need more guidance on appropriate ways to do that? And as we were talking about before with focusing and so on, do people need to be able to step away from that and be less communicative, less contactable in order to be productive and get their work done? One of the big things that sort of triggered me thinking about this, there's a guy called Jason Fried, who's co-founder of a company called Basecamp, who do sort of project management sort of software, and they actually have online their guide to internal communication, and they sort of advocate against using group chat too much. The analogy is that group chat is like being in an all-day meeting with random participants and no agenda. It can steal focus, and particularly if that's a habit for your team, what we were talking about with focus time becomes very difficult if you feel like you're missing out of conversations that are happening on the group chat, or you come back to it 2 hours later and that conversation is done, it's finished, some consensus has been reached, and you entirely missed out. So people end up in the habit of being in there all the time. And so, yeah, I think it's worth thinking about, are we past that peak of communication? Are we now into this dialing it all down so we can actually get some real work done rather than chat constantly?
Yeah, I think it's, there are, in my mind, I think, just too many ways to get hold of people. And we all know that person who will send you an email, and then send you an IM to tell you they've sent you an email. And in some cases, even then phone you because you haven't responded in in a short period of time.
Yeah, let's have a meeting on Tuesday to discuss my email.
exactly. And I think in retrospect, one of the worst things that could have been done was ever calling chat instant messaging. I think that set the wrong message from the outcome. And compared to email, yes, it was obviously you could see real time someone was replying, etc. But I think it's sort of set a mentality there that it's, well, you need to deal with it straight away because it's instant messaging, right? It's like, no, I'm doing things. But I would love to see email die. I find it a real frustration now. I'm sure it will at some point. But
I think it definitely has a place. And what I think is interesting in my analytics that we were talking about a minute ago, that there's a sort of new feature there now to delay sending of emails until the recipient is into their working hours, which I thought was quite interesting because there are some people who will they'll review their mailbox in the evening and get through the 100 different emails they had and maybe forward some things out or send out thoughts to people as they go, which can be really toxic because then people feel they need to read it and respond to it at the time. But by being able to switch that on and say, okay, right, I'm doing this reply to Bob, he starts at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, he'll get it at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, but maybe Alice in the States doesn't start until 2 p.m. UK time. She doesn't need that email in the middle of the night, she needs it at the start of her working day. I thought that was quite an interesting concept, as just a way of, you've dealt with it, it's kind of out of your head and you're passing it on to someone, but you're building in that delay so you're not creating that expectation with the other person that they need to deal with it right away. Because I've often used that delay sending in Outlook when I've been working on something later on and I the recipient doesn't need it till tomorrow morning, but also they're more likely to read it if it hits their inbox at 9:15 rather than 10 p.m.
I mean, I'm quite protective over my time. So for me, family is super important. And yes, you might work sort of fairly lengthy hours, but come, I don't know, let's say sort of 6:30 or something in the evening, the phone will be left in the office.
Yeah.
And it's the reason I have two separate phones, one for me, my personal stuff, and one for the work one, so that when I do want to finish at the end of the day, I haven't got anything else flicking in the background. It's just all my stuff and all my nonsense that's bothering me. But I do think, again, it comes back to how you manage your relationships. Is there too much communication? Yeah, there's too many ways. It's like, but that leaving the phone type thing in the office, I know full well that if there was an absolute catastrophe or whatever it was, that Steve or Jason or whoever it was can phone me on my on my mobile, good old fashioned GSM call, because it's different. Nobody uses it. But it's kind of like the old 1980s, 1990s pager type effect, isn't it? It's the sort of,
you need a break
something's wrong.
Then,
Yeah.
You're going to go offline and stuff. You still need that, and you've got to have that kind of cultural understanding of when that's to be used and when it isn't. Otherwise, people will just hide away from that. I hope this is peak communication. Personally, it can't be good for people's brains and therefore their concentration and their productivity and all this other stuff we've discussed already, to have them being pulled in all these different directions, different flashing things, context switching like crazy. And I think we've got to the point potentially where we've done all this because we can, but just because you can do everything in real time and work out loud so that everyone can see it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right approach for everything. And I think these things are still fairly new and shiny, but I think you may see a bit of a consolidation. There does seem to be a little bit of a growing movement against these notifications and stuff.
Do we think then that in the future, actually it's sort of flicking back slightly to the past, if you think about email, you can use Exchange, you can use Linux based, you can use a number of different platforms, and none of them particularly care where something's coming from or going to. We used to be able to do things like the gateways between Jabber and Link, and of course that all went down the tubes. Are we going to enter a point where there is some sort of central bridge where I'm a Teams user, right? And it doesn't matter whether somebody else is on platform A, B, C, D, whatever it is, we're all just going to be able to have, this is my communication tool, I'm going to respond. Do you think we'll ever reach that point?
Yeah, we have. It's called WhatsApp. But I mean, it's kind of a shame that those universal things kind of disappeared. It's kind of become a case of, I think, the minority players in the market generally are the ones seeking more interoperability because they're the ones that feel themselves being squeezed out. And I know Cisco has a pretty slick bridge for getting Jabber stuff to and from Skype for Business, and I think Teams now. So it looks to a Skype user like the Jabber user is just on Skype. It works, at least for IM and so on. But these always have so many headaches. Like once you get beyond very basic usage, you very quickly bump into the limitations of them. And generally, people all want to be in the same place as everyone else so that they get the best possible experience.
It does make me wonder whether email will fill that void as much as you said you'd be happy for it to go.
Yeah.
Maybe it morphs into that's your external thing because everyone has it, it's ubiquitous, it's universal, there's none of those. Oh, that's not quite set up, the federation's not there, or the technology is not quite right. As much as I want things to be in one place, I could live with, I think, email being an external thing and then sitting in something like Teams for all your internal comms. I don't see the point in email for internal comms. External, I could, because then you're not having to worry about those.
I think that's my biggest frustration with email. And then, you know, I mean, I did Exchange for so long, and, you know, back in the days of X400 and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, I think the reality of it is, yes, you're right. It should be sort of almost an external tool. And I think one of the things that really does wind me up, and most of the company know that I hate email lock, stock and barrel, is the fact that people put things into it, which, you know, even just before this session, I got an email from somebody in your company just asking me a question.
One liner from one person.
Yeah. No, don't. And then, you know, somebody a couple of hours before that bounced an email around because they'd forwarded it on from a customer, and all of a sudden there's like 7 or 8 people involved in it, and it's that's the frustration that drives me up the wall. I did actually have I was my poor long-suffering wife. I did have a sort of a flippant conversation with her after we agreed the topics, you know, sort of last week. And so, you know, it's like, what is the future of communications? And you talk about the fact that we've gone through, you know, from physical meetings, then we've gone to sort of much more email, and then we've got linking teams and come in and all this virtual meetings and collaboration and stuff like that. It's like, so what's the next step? And it's like, well, it's almost like a physical meeting. Going back to communicating face to face, because if you look at the communication types, and there's some statistics from years ago, it was something like, you know, verbal communication only, it's 7% of the complete package, or no, written is 7%, verbal goes up to 40 something, then we do for a virtual sort of video meeting, it's up to the sort of 70s, 80s, etc. But you only get your 100% of your communication skills when you're in person. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, if we're going up to virtual consultations and meetings and chatting to each other virtually, the next step up for quality of communication is in person, right?
Yeah, I think some of that. I think that, you know, there's a lot of talk at the moment around, you know, hybrid working, hybrid office. People will spend some of the time in the office having their in-person meetings, then all disperse to do their work separately at home. And I mean, a big part of that is the ability to prepare and delay some things until you meet with your colleagues to talk about them. And you know, a big part of that whole Basecamp internal communication thing does sort of hinge around that asynchronous communication, of you may well put something out there, but you don't expect a response right away. And also, rather than in a group chat style firing out a line at a time as you think of it, actually collating those thoughts together, getting a first draft, a few paragraphs together of what you're trying to get across, and then putting that out there for discussion. So
do you think there's an element of
digest it, and rather than a very quick fire discussion in a group chat, you know, somebody piles on with some other different idea, it goes off in a tangent, and nothing gets done.
So we almost need to just remember to take a step back, really, and have a little look about
the next step to step back, essentially.
I mean,
we push this as far as we can. People just can't really hack this.
There's something quite deep about that, isn't it? The next step forward is to take a step back. That's quite deep.
It's interesting that there are teams that work across different time zones who are kind of forced to work in this kind of style, where, you know, a London team will be working 9 to 5 in London, but there's maybe a West Coast US team they work with. They'll have a window of an hour or two at the end of the UK day, start of the US day, to do any handover, to have any meetings, to talk about what they need to get done. But then in those times in between, they're either preparing for the next one or producing deliverables from before. And I know quite a few people who work in that sort of environment. You know, lots of banks have teams spread between UK and US. And in some ways that can work really well. Yeah, it's annoying you can't get hold of Dave in the US at 9 o'clock in the morning UK time, but equally thinking about what they might need for the following day and vice versa can actually be really, really useful, and again can slow that down, put a bit more thought into the things that people are doing and how they do it.
So there's basically, I think, to kind of wrap this one up, because we're really saying that we probably have peaked on the number of different sort of communication platforms, or if something else comes in, it's effectively going to be one knocking another one out effectively. But we need to stop and actually have a look again for what is that right communication tool for what you want to do.
Yeah, I think there are definitely places for, like, there are things that group chat is a great fit for. If you've got some critical issue and you need a war room sort of scenario, people need up to the minute updates, and someone's going, yes, I've restored this service, yes, this is back online. Group chat is perfect for that.
Do you think
group chat is also great just for the social thing of having somewhere where people can chat away during the day, but maybe you're going to mute that chat and just dip into it as and when through the day.
Here's a slight side conversation, Jen, just before we wrap this one up. Do you think that, I'll say, the ease of communication has lulled people into a sense where they just go, oh, I'll just add Simon. No, I'll just add John.
Absolutely.
And actually it's made it worse.
then job's done. You passed it over to somebody else now. Someone else.
Yeah. I sent them a message. It's fine.
Yeah, it's almost too easy. You need a bit more kind of, like as Simon mentioned, kind of that kind of basic approach of going, if somebody could only pass ownership or request a review from you, if it was a bit more of a structured document and go, here you go and review it, and then come back with the questions, and then there might be a meeting at the end down the line, not bombarding people with chat or just working on it.
Well, there is an adage, isn't there? There is an adage that used to go around a long time ago, a good few years ago. If a meeting can start without you, you're not needed. I guess that still applies to group chats and virtual meetings and stuff like that. If you're, if they can crack on, then actually what you're doing there.
Yeah, I mean, there's meeting discipline. It can be a problem in lots of organisations where you'll get an invite for a meeting with barely a subject and no body, and I'll quite often reply to that.
Yeah.
Like, is there an agenda? Is there something that you need me to do in this meeting? Do I need to prepare something for this meeting? And if the answer is no, we thought you just might be interested. It's like, no, I'll probably do
no, I'm not interested.
But yeah, it is. Yeah, the person organising the meeting needs to figure out what they're trying to do, who would actually be relevant to that, and again, it comes into like putting in some of that prep work ahead of time. Like if you can say to the participants, this is what I'd like you to bring to the meeting. I'd like you to think about X, and we'll talk about it in the meeting. Then you can get the meeting done in half the time sometimes.
Do you know what I'd love to see? Is actually either in Teams or Skype or in Outlook. I guess you could put it in several places. Is that if I set up a meeting and it's got 6 people in it and it's 45 minutes long, stick a cost against that in the top corner. Give everybody an hourly rate or an hourly cost.
It's 6 times 45 minutes. It's not a 45 minute.
Exactly.
I've seen it said like a 1 hour meeting for 10 people. It's not a 1 hour meeting. That's 10 hours. That's gone.
Exactly. Oh well, yeah. Maybe that's something we should feed back into the dev team. Just put a little cost button on. This meeting is going to cost you somewhere in the region of £2,500. That would be an interesting spin to see if it changed behaviours, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Cool.
Right. That is right. A lot of it rolls back to those. It's behavioural. It's cultural. It's an adoption side, as in you can say as much. Like you said, it is easy to do this stuff and you can get lulled into it, but unless you set some kind of ground rules to people and really enforce them, people might not consider it. They might send out meetings like that. How are you got to intentionally go about going, when you set a meeting, do an agenda and here's why, or do a structured document first. Otherwise
Yeah.
Not everyone's just going to immediately latch
I mean,
onto that.
lots of people are new to Teams. You know, they kind of get chat as instant messages, they get calls, they get online meetings. They don't really understand Teams and channels and why they should use that over group chat.
Cool.
It's a really common thing, particularly with our customers and other people I know living that working from home life over the last year.
Brilliant. Right, should we tackle the last topic then? Right, so the last of the three topics was around data analytics, and basic gist of it, I guess, is how much data is too much data, and depending on what you want to do with it. Are you looking at performance? Are you looking at capacity planning? Are you looking at, like we were talking about earlier on, productivity? I can't even say it now. Productivity. Where is a useful amount of data, and where does it become a bit control-y, big brothery type?
Yeah, this is interesting because news sort of broke back in November last year. There was some sort of analysts very critical of the feature called productivity score that Microsoft has. So Microsoft gathers lots of data about how people are using Office 365, which helps them, understand how customers are using it for their own capacity planning and so on. But this allows organizations to drill down, actually down to individual people, and see, get a score for how much they are using Teams, how many emails they're sending, this sort of thing. And the criticism of it was that this is a workplace surveillance tool, that people don't want to be spied on as they're working away doing their day job. And it does raise that interesting question of, like, is there even a useful productivity score? Like, is the number of emails that people send, or the number of chat messages they send, or the meetings they do, in any way reflective of the useful productive work that they're getting done? I think that does kind of tie into the whole thing of, like, focus time and distractions and so on. Because obviously when you're focusing, you're not doing any of those things that bump up your productivity score.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're talking about, is the number of emails a reflection of how productive someone is, I would say that it's probably quite a small number of emails that would then turn you into being a negative impact on the productivity score. Yeah. So it depends whether you're counting that productivity as, oh, you're communicating with lots of people, therefore it's good, or is it coming back to what we've already talked about? You've actually got so much communication going on that you're not doing stuff.
Yeah, I think the big flaw in that is you're measuring inputs, not outputs. I mean, you could go all the way through to tracking the number of keystrokes someone's making on their keyboard to make sure they're doing X words per minute. But if they're just mashing the keypad with their palm, it's rubbish. It's not producing anything. So, like, okay, your company's sending 100,000 chats a day. How many of those were someone who was concentrating on something and it blew their concentration for 20 minutes, had to refocus all the rest of it? I think it overlays with a number of things we've discussed. Conflating usage with productivity or output is really tricky, because it's how many different things go into what comes out at the end of it. Like, it's not 1-to-1 ratio.
I mean, so much of this, I think, comes down to sort of good management of outputs rather than the sort of presenteeism. Lots of managers have been used to sitting in an office, and the people they manage are right over there, and they can probably see their screens. They can see that they've got Word, Outlook, what have you up. They're not wasting all day on Facebook. And then everyone's had to work from home, and some managers get very, very worried about that maybe people are sat watching Bargain Hunt rather than actually doing their work. I've certainly heard of much worse workplace surveillance packages that companies have been trying to sell organizations like that can measure, how often keystrokes are happening, even down to, like, webcams being on, so they can tell when people are at their desks and so on.
Oh, blimey.
Yeah.
That's all.
like
completely
you are on the
opposite.
clock. You will have your camera on, working at the desk. I want to be able to see that you're working away.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and you ask anybody in the sort of the consulting ACM or pre-sales teams, they get exactly the same message. It's like, you have a job to do, you have your tasks that you need to deliver them, be available when you said you're going to, on the calls you said you're going to be on. Outside of that, I don't care. I really don't care. It's, if you want to go out and walk the dogs for a couple of hours, that's fine, but there is a level of trust that comes with that. In fact that I will leave you to your own devices to fulfill what the brief of your role is. If you don't, somebody's going to complain about it, be it project management or the account manager, something's not happening, customers saying this isn't, in which case it's going to come to the surface.
Something a lot of managers will have to adapt to, I guess, with the shift to mass working from home, is not being able to. I wonder how many people out there are relying on something like Presence as a substitute for actually be able to see people, to have a list of people to go, oh, like, everyone's available. That's fine.
Yeah.
What I also say to people, if you've got a piece of deep knowledge work to go on, it's fine to log off. Are all managers going to be comfortable with somebody who's just signed out and is unavailable for 2 hours? Are they going to be going, well, people should be.
Yeah.
People should have that trust in their employees, but it's going to be a bit of a mindset change.
Yeah, I mean, go on, Simon, go.
It made me laugh, because I was thinking the other day about our old timesheeting system, Time Prompt.
Oh yeah.
You've both been around Modality long enough to remember that. And one of the things that it had, that I think was just a demo that we could do that, was an indication of how many hours a day you'd been signed into Link.
Yeah.
And so it would be there clearly on your timesheet. But if you had signed out for 3 hours to get something done, you'd have a much lower number against that day than if you had just sat there with Skype on and maybe a bit of mouse jiggling software to keep the present
left
free.
click every 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I did. I used to work for a big consultancy, and we were looking at Germany, and putting Skype for Business or Link back in then, and the Workers' Council were so against it, and the first question that came back was, "We like it. Can we have it without the presence?"
Turn it off.
Kind of breaks the whole model of knowing if somebody is around. And the argument that came back was, well, we don't want it to be used as a way of seeing if people are online or working or not working and all that sort of stuff. And my immediate reaction was, what, you mean there are managers who have the time to sit there and watch when people are online or not? Because I know I don't. I've got no. If someone's offline, they're offline. If they've gone away, they're away. It's that's about as far as my level of thought goes, and maybe that's open to abuse. I don't know. But
you say that I do know people who manage their teams using the tag for presence feature, so they see when people go offline, online, away.
No
way. They get a little notification through the day to say, oh yeah, no, Bob's back online, and they'll be like, where's he been for the last 2 hours? Yeah. But no, it's interesting. It's interesting you say about Workers' Council.
I want to know who now. not within us.
Not Modality.
No.
But no, I mean, with German Workers' Council, like one of the customers for our sort of call quality software, a big German software company, and one of the things we do with that is to help them proactively look for people having call quality problems. We can find the people having poor quality calls, not using the right devices, maybe having some problem with Wi-Fi. And usually with customers, we pull those out and go, great, these are the things you need to push off to your support teams, call these people, find out how you can help them have better calls. And usually, great. Anything to do with German Workers' Council, they're like, oh, no, we can't possibly contact someone to say, we see you've had some bad calls, because that would imply, oh, we're going in and looking at all your data and pulling this stuff out, even though that's with good intentions. And you're going, we want to help you. We want to help you have a better experience on Teams or Skype for Business. They were so reticent to do anything like that.
I think
Like, if it's something we can do on the server side without anyone knowing, great. If we need to actually talk to someone about what's going on, then
yeah, I think there is an awful lot of good that can be done from the data, and
yeah,
the productivity side we've already talked about, because that's, well, what are you measuring? But one of the conversations we had around productivity with one of our clients, I don't think it actually went into production in the end, was around, let's look at the users' data and their activity and their behavior. But the driver behind it was, I want to identify people who are working during the business day and then working again in the evening or in the morning, and that's over a sustained period of time. So identifying people who have who have really been burning the candle, I guess, at both ends. So I think there is an awful lot we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in part choosing my words carefully, because a big part of what we do is sell software to analyze data that comes out of Teams. But I mean, the way that we try to look at this data with customers, we always sort of stress it's generally not about things being right or wrong. It's about understanding how people are using Teams, and quite often there is a user adoption kind of element to this. It's worth looking for people who maybe have never joined an online meeting, or they've never turned on video, or what have you, being able to reach out to them and say, hey, are you aware that Teams can do this? This may well help you with your job. And a really big part of user adoption is understanding how people are working and how things might help them to be able to fit those together. And conversely, with our data, we can find teams that are having lots of activity, and that those usually make good starting points to talk to the people responsible for those teams, find out how they're using it. They can make good case studies to the rest of the organization to be able to say, oh, Graham in logistics uses Teams in this way. This is how he communicates with his team. Here's how they keep all of our products flowing out of the warehouses all day. And be able to take that, and maybe the people who are more laggards, who would just pick up the phone or would just send an email, to show them, hey, these are maybe ways that maybe they'll work better for you, or maybe the work you do doesn't fit that, and there's a reason that you dial into one Teams meeting a week because that's what you need to do for your job.
Cool.
It's much easier to identify those users across what might be a large user base than what I've done in a previous life, which was wandering around on the floor of people who were using Skype or Link for the first time and going, oh no, that's not right. It plugs in there or something like that. If you want to, mine through thousands of lines of data and pull out some examples and practically put training documentation out there, it's potentially a lot easier way of doing it than sending an army of people out to go and help them do it.
Yeah, because that's not productive either, is it?
we really commonly find teams where we can go, oh, there's 1,000 people in this team, but only 3 people ever post in there. And we'll talk about it, and they'll go, oh yeah, no, that's a team that we use basically for storing documentation, and those people will post a message in the channel to say, there's a new version of this doc, here's the link to it in the files. Nobody else needs to post in it. There's nothing to discuss. It's purely used as a one-way communication thing. And that's what I mean by there's no right or wrong thing. When you try to start applying a score to things like that, it can quickly fall apart, because the ways that people work and behave will be different, and what is productive for one person is not productive for another.
Cool. Well, we've reached our time, but I think that's been brilliant. I've enjoyed that. I think that the data is data useful? Yeah, it's really useful. Just use it the right way. A bit like productivity. Measure it the right way. Are we communicating too much? Not if you use it the right way. There's a pattern emerging amongst all of these things, I think. But thank you very much, both of you. That's been absolutely brilliant. So just a reminder, this was Simon Gardner, Senior Consultant within our Collaboration Intelligence team, and John Ketley, who is the Service Improvement Program Manager for Managed Services. And we will be back in a couple of weeks' time with the next topics on the Mod Pod.
This is the Mod Pod, brought to you by Modality, helping businesses optimize their Microsoft technologies everywhere.